So today we're starting a new four-part sermon series in which we're focusing upon one of Jesus' closest followers, who's the fisherman called Simon Peter. And he is someone with whom many of us, certainly I, can identify. Because as the New Testament makes very plain, Simon Peter was quite ordinary in a way. He was not a paragon of perfection. He didn't get everything right. So if you are one of those extraordinary people who is a paragon of perfection and gets everything right, this isn't for you. But if, like me, you're pretty much like that, this is for you. And we're calling the sermon series Fail Forward, because that's precisely what Simon Peter seemed to do. In many different ways, some big, some small, Simon Peter failed. He got things wrong. He mucked up, but instead of being completely defeated and crushed by that, he failed forward. Simon Peter learned from his mistakes. Simon Peter grew spiritually and matured as a human being, not because he got everything right, but because from the moment that he heard Jesus saying to him, "Follow me," to his dying day, he never stopped moving forward with God, seeking to follow Jesus. The fact that the New Testament contains so many examples of how Peter failed rather undermines some of the super saintly images that have emerged over the last 2,000 years about Peter. After all, those who make these sort of shiny and pure visions of Peter say, surely Peter must have been an outstanding disciple because he was one of Jesus' inner circle. He, James and John were the three that were closest to Jesus. So surely he must have been special. And as Matthew 16 verses 18 to 19 records, Jesus once said to Simon Peter, "You are Peter." It was actually Jesus who gave him that name. And that's a Greek name that literally means rock. Jesus said, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So because of that reading and others, Peter is often portrayed as standing at the gates of heaven and deciding who goes in and who doesn't. He's also celebrated by Roman Catholics as the first pope, which is why the great basilica, the great cathedral at the heart of the Vatican City, is called St. Peter's. It's why each successive pope is said to sit upon the throne of St. Peter. The problem with such images of Peter as some kind of uber powerful, successful figure is that it can make him seem so remote and so unlike us. When in fact, as I say, the New Testament makes it very plain that in many ways Simon Peter is not particularly special. He did not follow Jesus perfectly. In his eagerness to get things right, he would often get things horribly wrong. Throughout his life, Peter failed, but as we shall see over these next 4 weeks, whenever he failed, Peter refused to be defeated by that failure. Peter did not fall backward as a result of his failures. He may have wobbled for a little bit because of them, but ultimately he kept on failing forward. Peter's failures were springboards for his own growth, his own maturity, his own wisdom. And this propensity to grow and learn through failure is something that Peter has in common with many people who are the most successful in the world. Dyson's Bagless vacuum cleaner. I've discovered that as long as you keep it clean, it's brilliant. But in the 15-year process of inventing it, Sir James Dyson is said to have built 5,126 prototypes. Each one of them failed. But he kept on trying. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books have been read by millions. And yet, before Bloomsbury agreed tentatively to print them, Rowling received rejections from 12 of the largest, most major publishers in the world. 12 rejections before a yes. It was Winston Churchill who once put it that success is walking from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And that sort of describes Peter. This kind of failing forward in Peter's life is clearly demonstrated in the episode recorded in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. It comes at the end of an eventful day during which the disciples have witnessed Jesus healing many of the sick, and then with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, miraculously feeding thousands of hungry people. After all of that, Jesus instructs his disciples to go ahead of him, cross the Sea of Galilee by boat, give him the space that he needs to go up a mountain and to pray and recharge his batteries. So the disciples set off on that boat. Night falls over the water, and as they travel through the darkness, the wind is against them, and the boat is being buffeted by the waves. And then shortly before sunrise, when the darkness is deepest, Jesus approaches them walking on the water. And understandably, the disciples are terrified. They think Jesus is a ghost. And aware of their terror, Jesus says to them, "Take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid." And of all the disciples in the boat, who are all equally terrified, Peter alone seems to recover quickest and respond to Jesus positively. "Lord, if it's you," he says, "tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus replies to Peter, "Okay, out you pop," or words to that effect. So Peter steps out of the boat and he starts towards Jesus, walking on the water. But in no time at all, Peter fails. His focus is drawn away from Jesus and to the wind and to the waves and to the peril of the position he's in. He's immersed with fear. He begins literally to sink. And he cries out to Jesus, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reaches out his hand, grabs hold of Peter, and says, "You of little faith. Why did you doubt?" In the space of less than a few minutes, Peter has swung from being full of fear and doubt, "I've seen a ghost," to being full of enthusiasm and faith, literally stepping out in faith onto the water, to moments later being back in fear and doubt. Had Jesus been looking to recruit as his followers people of unshakable faith and utter fearlessness and rock-steady confidence, then in every sense, figuratively and literally, Peter was sunk. Peter, had that been the case, would not have fitted the person's specification for being a follower of Jesus. Peter, as Jesus said to him, had little faith. He was often overcome by fear. And when it came to the crunch, just like water pouring through the holes of a colander, Peter leaked faith. He drained away from him. What Peter demonstrates very clearly, and I think one of the reasons why he features so heavily within the New Testament, is that those whom Christ calls to follow him are not some mythical paragons of total perfection who effortlessly get everything right. They are like most, if not all of us, a mix of faith and doubt, good traits and bad traits, ability and disability, success and failure, right and wrong. Sadly, many of us tend to judge people and things not on a grey scale, but black and white. It's often referred to as dualistic thinking. You're either this or you're that. There's no middle in that judgment. The dualistic mindset, therefore, is binary. It sets things against each other. It's either or thinking. It knows and judges by comparison, by opposition, by differentiation. It uses descriptive pairs of words, which our language is full of, like good and evil, intelligent, stupid, pretty, ugly. The list is endless of these oppositions. But the reality is that those words are not only rather subjective, but in each case describe two extremes of a huge spectrum. The truth, in any case, almost certainly lies somewhere in between the extremes. When it comes to human beings, we are each a mixture of selfishness and selflessness, fear and doubt, as well as faith and trust, beauty as well as ugliness, strength as well as weakness, good as well as bad, and so on and so forth. Jesus didn't say to Peter, leave the worst of yourself behind and bring the best of you to follow me. He didn't say that. He said to the real Peter, warts and all, as he says to the real you and the real me, warts and all, come as you are. I'm not calling the mask you wear, I'm calling the real you behind the mask. I'm not calling you on your best day, I'm calling you on every day. Follow me. I think that one of Peter's greatest strengths was his own self-awareness. He appears to have had an honest, healthy, and realistic view of who he was. On the one hand, he knew that he had personality and character and gifts and abilities and energy and skills. In that sense, I can see why Jesus might call me to follow him. But on the other hand, he was also aware of his weakness, his propensity to fail. And we see this very clearly in Luke's account of what happened when Jesus first called Simon Peter to follow him. The early verses of Luke chapter 5 describe how the crowds were gathering by the water's edge as Jesus was teaching them. The fishermen were there. They were washing their nets. They'd been out all night. They'd caught nothing. They're a bit tired and frustrated, but they're there listening to Jesus teaching. And the crowds are gathering, and the crowds got so numerous that Jesus felt a bit hemmed in. So he, in effect, commandeered Simon Peter's boat, had Simon Peter put it out a little bit from the shore so that he could use it as a pulpit and stand there and preach to the crowds. As they stood on the shore, he was in the boat by the shore. And then when Jesus had finished teaching, he said to Simon Peter, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And after he couldn't help himself explaining, "Well, we've been out all night. We didn't catch anything. This water seems pretty empty to me." Simon Peter did as Jesus requested. And he went out, they let the nets down, and they were so filled with fish. They'd never seen so many fish that they had to call his partners to come in their boat so that they could land the catch. And Simon Peter's reaction on seeing this was to fall to his knees and say, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful person. Go away from me. I'm a sinful person." In other words, Simon Peter knew himself to be someone who mucks up. He was aware that he had failed in the past. He was pretty sure he would fail again in the future. And he didn't try and hide that fact from Jesus. Basically said, "Jesus, be aware of what you're dealing with here. I muck up. You're best getting away from me." And it was at that point that Jesus said to Peter, "Don't be afraid." In other words, don't be afraid that you muck up. Don't be afraid that you fail. Don't let your failure hold you back. From now on, you will fish for people. It's as if Jesus was saying to Simon Peter, "I know the real you. I know you'll fail from time to time. But I've chosen the real you. I've chosen the real you to follow me, to share in my work." And then it concludes with these words, "So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him." I believe that Jesus is calling you and calling me, the real you and the real me, to follow him today and every day. Jesus knows that we are far from perfect. He says to us, as he said to Simon Peter, "Follow me anyway." Jesus knows that from time to time we'll fail, and he says to us, as he says to Peter, "Don't be afraid of that. Yes, you probably are going to fail. Don't be afraid to fail." Jesus knows that whenever we do step out of the boat, we're likely to get consumed with thinking about the wind and waves. We're likely to occasionally take our eyes from him and be overcome by fear. But even so, Jesus says to us, as he said to Simon Peter, hop out anyway, give it a go anyway. Do it anyway. Jesus, towards the end of his earthly ministry, said to Peter and said to all who would follow, do not be afraid. I know who you are. Peace I give to you anyway. Peace I leave with you. I don't give as the world gives, so do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. Follow me. And just as Peter, when he was in a bad patch, in the middle, just about to drown, was able to say, Lord, save me, we can cry out knowing that Jesus has promised to be with us, even to the end of the age. I'll never leave you or forsake you, he says. With that thought in mind, with that knowledge of that the God who calls us is the God who is with us. Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, even in our faults and failures and fears.